Welcome everyone to our session on maximizing memory. My name is Paul Nowak. I'm the founder and CEO here at Iris Reading, and I think you'll find today's session very helpful. We are streaming on multiple platforms today. It's almost a little odd. We're doing a Zoom, GoToWebinar, YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So lots of things happening all at once. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or comments below. And let's get right into what we're going to be covering, because I think you'll find it very useful. So first of all, when it comes to memory and any other reading related topics, if you're interested in these kind of things, subscribe to us on YouTube. That's where we're going to be putting most of our content. And that is just at my name, Paul Nowak. It's pronounced Novak like a V, but it actually has a W here. And you could just find it. If you're already watching us on YouTube, then just make sure you subscribe and you like. That actually goes a long way to help us out and help grow our channel. We're currently sitting around, I think, 44,000 views. We want to improve that over time. So please like and subscribe if you want to get more content like this. And like I said, we're going to cover memory today, but as readers, there's really three key areas that you want to focus on if you're going to be, what I would say, faster and more efficient. And that is, you've got your speed, right? You've got comprehension. You have retention as well. We want all three of these areas to be as efficient as possible if we're going to be reading productively. Now, today we're going to be focusing more on the retention side of things, and that is memory and how do you remember things. Some people forget very easily. That might be you. I know I've forgotten material before. It can be very frustrating, right? We've all had scenarios where you read for a period of time, and at a certain point you're like, I have no clue what I just read. I can't remember anything. And sometimes that's an issue with focus, not always a problem with memory. But we'll work on memory today. And if you've taken one of our speed reading workshops, if you haven't, go to our website, irisreading.com. And we talk about this thing called the IRIS method. And IRIS is the name of our organization. It's basically an acronym for how you would approach reading material if you want to approach it in a very comprehensive way. And when I say comprehensive, I mean understanding the material well, reading it faster, and ultimately remembering. So what exactly do we do? First, you're inspecting what you got to read. Now, that could be a chapter, it could be an article, it can be a report. You got to inspect first. And that means get familiar with something before you read it. This is very straightforward advice, but the vast majority, probably around 95% of readers, are not doing this. So when I say inspect, I mean looking through and reading first introductions, headings and subheadings, boldface words. If there are any charts, tables, or diagrams, you're looking at those. Just the titles. And then the conclusion. If you have any questions at the end, you might read the questions, but this is everything you read before you actually read the chapter. Like I said, very simple advice to follow, but most people don't do it. Most people, if they're on the next chapter in their book, they're just like, okay, I'm on page 1 of the chapter, let me just read from here. And they don't always look around. I do understand if you are reading fiction and you don't want to spoil it, then fine, read things in order. But when it comes to nonfiction, it's a good idea to flip through, looking at those headings. You know what it's kind of like? It's kind of like what you would do before you play a sport or before you exercise. You would warm up, you stretch out. So we do all this, and then we read the material. If you do this first, you'll read it faster. And you'll have better comprehension. But what if you have a short article like this? Well, then this is a little different, where there's no headings and subheadings here. I'm just going to read the first sentence of each paragraph. That's how we approach a short article. But the idea is you inspect first and then you read. When you're done reading, you inquire. When I say inquire, I mean ask questions about what you just read. And questions could be straightforward, like what are the biggest topics or most important points that they covered? It could be things like what's going to be on the test? I wonder what are they going to cover on the test that's coming up? And that leads us to the final step, which is store. How am I going to store this information? And we're going to dwell on this topic right here, because sometimes you got to memorize something. Like I've got this book here, Animal Farm. This is a great book. It's a classic by George Orwell. And Animal Farm, if you're not familiar with it, is it's a dystopian novel, or sometimes they refer to it as a political satire. And it's very short. You can see it's about 100 pages. Let's say you were reading this book. And by the way, it's about a bunch of animals on a farm, obviously. And what happens is they decide, we're not being treated properly, so we're going to rebel and we're going to take over the farm. And that they actually are successful. So the animals all get together and they kick the farmer off the farm, and the animals take over and decide we're going to create a society where all animals are equal. And as you would imagine, this does not turn out as planned. Okay, so anyway, you go through this, and of course, when you're reading this, you can make connections to what you know about politics and power and history, the context of this. This was published post World War II, after World War II, at the beginning of kind of the onset of the Cold War. So if you know what's going on historically at the time, that gives you some additional context, right? Now, you could read this whole book and understand it really well. But what if you got to memorize something? Like on page 19, I don't know if you can see this, but there's something called the 7 Commandments. So basically the animals get together and decide, you know what, we're going to have 7 commandments, kind of like their laws, their rules. Like number 1 is whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy, humans. Law number 2, or 7 commandments. The second commandment is whatever goes upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. And then you have no animal shall wear clothes, no animal shall sleep in a bed. Basically, don't do human things. No animal shall drink alcohol, no animal shall kill any other animal, and all animals are equal. Anyway, so let's say you got to memorize. It's only 7 commandments, but those are the situations where your comprehension might be good, but you might forget a few of those commandments. Now, it might be 7. What if you have to remember 10 things, or 12, or 15, or 20 things? That's where we really need a strategy. And we're going to go over some things that affect your memory. So first off, we all know repetition helps you remember things. I'll repeat that. Repetition helps you to remember. That's how we all know that. But this is not the only thing that affects your memory. We're going to cover other things. But I've got musical imagery here because we all know music has a lot of repetition involved, right? Like if a song is very popular, you hear it over and over again. And there are songs you could hear right now that you haven't heard in years, and you still remember the lyrics to the song. It's actually kind of cool that your brain can do that. However, there are situations where you could even remember things you don't like. Like there are songs you don't even like that you have memorized. I'm thinking of Baby Shark. Some of you know what I mean when I say Baby Shark. Or I'm thinking there are boy bands from the 90s, and I didn't like any of this music, but I have those songs stuck in my head, unfortunately, but it's how repetition works. And music has a lot of other repetition, right? There's the beat that repeats, the melody repeats, the chorus repeats. So repetition helps. But when you're reading, you don't want to read something over and over again for repetition. I want to read this chapter once, or this book once, and I want to understand it well. So we need to get our repetitions in a little differently. So here's how we do that. When it comes to this process, this IRIS method that we talked about, this is where you can actually take advantage of repetition. And the way you do that is basically you inspect first and then you read, right? And then after you're done with that, what do? We go to the process of inquiring and asking questions about what did I just read? What are the biggest takeaways? And those questions could be things like, what do I need to memorize? Now I'm going to store. We're getting repetitions in this process, as you can see. So what we're doing is not just getting repetitions, but we got to do a few other things. If we really want to memorize something, we got to include visualization, and that is something they call your mind's eye. We got to visualize what we've read or what we need to remember. Your mind's eye is the reason I have this creepy picture of a brain with an eyeball on it, but basically visualize it. You also need to, oh, and by the way, visualization is the reason why you forget people's name, but you remember their face, right? How many of you have forgotten my name? I'm sure plenty of you have forgotten my name. My name's Paul, by the way, and if you forgot my name, not a big deal. People forget names, but you remember faces more easily. because a face is visual information. So keep that in mind. We're going to use that. And visual recall is always better than your verbal recall. That's why McDonald's has a logo as well. Now, as far as association goes, this is basically your brain's ability to associate one thing to another, and that's how we learn. So, and this is the final thing that's very important. You remember things that are weird. This is why McDonald's at some point in their corporate history decided to use a clown to help sell cheeseburgers. Does not make any sense. Actually, I'm curious to know what other weird commercials or advertisements have you seen? Tell me in the comments or in the chat. I'm curious to know. First thing that popped to mind for me recently, I watched a movie, and before the movie was starting, there was a Coca-Cola commercial. And in that commercial, that advertisement, the bears were drinking Coca-Cola. These polar bears are drinking Coke. That doesn't make any sense. Why is Coke doing that? Actually, if you're wondering why these polar bears are almost extinct, it could be because they're drinking too much Coke. But we know why Coke is doing that. Anything weird is more memorable. So let me know in the comments or in the chat, what do you think of? Any other companies or commercials you think of? I'm thinking Geico, you know, that talking lizard. There's probably others you can think of, but we're going to try to take advantage of this idea that you remember things that are weird. So we're going to do a little exercise here, and I'll show you how you might be able to memorize something like this. Let's say, hello, Anakin. And I see others in here. Hello, Antonio. Hello, Sosita. Apologies if I mispronounce anybody's name. Let us know where you're joining us from. I see Anakin is joining us from the Philippines. I'm joining from South Florida, near the Miami area. So let us know in the chat where you joining us from, or in the comments if you're watching this in the future. I'm always curious to know where our audience is coming from. But what we're going to do right now is I'll show you how you can memorize a list of 12 things. You see this Brain Rules book over here. This is a book I read a while ago, and it's got you see the subtitle, so 12 principles for surviving and thriving at work, home, and school. Let's say you read this book, and here's the table of contents. There's 12 chapters, of course. You got to remember exercise, survival, wiring, attention, short-term memory, long-term memory, sleep, stress, sensory integration, vision, music, and exploration. Now, you may have come across, and a lot of students do, something called mnemonic devices, or mnemonics. It's spelled with an M, but it sounds mnemonics. Anyway, what is this? Mnemonics there's a variety of mnemonic devices, but they're basically little quick ways to remember something. It could be an acronym, it could be a word, it could be a song or like a short phrase. There's a lot of different ways to do mnemonic devices. However, the problem with mnemonic devices is it's very hard to create one on your own. So we're not going to do that, okay? I'm going to show you a better way. Like, for example, a mnemonic device could take like the first letter of each word, and we try to create another word, or we try to create a sentence like, I don't know, I can't even do it, or a song. I can't do it because I'm not that creative, okay? What I want you to know is that there is a better way. Something called, and we'll cover a few different memory techniques here, but one technique is called the numeric peg system. This is where you take numbers and you use the numbers to help you remember things. But what you got to do is you got to peg or associate the numbers to things that you're already familiar with. So I'll give you an example. The number 1, we're going to peg or associate it visually to a pencil. Okay, so I want you to commit that to memory right now. 1 is a pencil, and if you're wondering why, it's because it has the same shape. That's all. Okay, 1 is a pencil. Number 2 is a swan. 2 is the swan. Got it? You see the same shape? 2. 3 is McDonald's. You kind of got to look sideways for this one. You see the number 3 looks like McDonald's if we put the golden arches sideways. 3 is McDonald's. 4 is a chair. See the chair with the backrest over here, the legs. I know some people do their 4s like this. I make my 4s like that. So here's the seat, the backrest, legs. 4 is a chair. 5 is a hook. See the curvy part right there? 5 is a hook. And number 6 is a cherry. We only got to remember 10 things, by the way. So I'll just go through the rest a little quicker. You could always pause this if you need to stop and catch up. 6 is a cherry. You see the cherry right here with the little stem coming out, kind of like a 6. You see the same shape or similar shape. 7 is lightning. I promise you this comes in handy, okay? Just memorize the 10 and then you'll be good. 7 is lightning. You see the number 7 right there? There's another 7 right over there. Okay, 7 is lightning. 8 is a racetrack, even though it'd be kind of weird if they had racetracks with intersections like this, but 8 is going to be our racetrack. 9 is going to be a balloon. You see the balloon right over here with the little string? 9 is balloon. 10 is a place heading. When I say place heading, I mean a plate or a bowl. And this could be a spoon, or it could be a fork, or it could be chopsticks, whatever you want. But you see a 1 here, 1 and 0 to represent 10. Okay, now, if you got to remember things, you got a bunch of topics, right? I got to associate these numbers to whatever I need to memorize. Topic number 1, topic number 2, and so on. Here's how you do it. So we have these topics, right? Exercise, survival, wiring, attention, short-term memory, long-term memory, sleep, stress, sensory integration, vision, music, and exploration. So we got all these things that need to be associated. Exercise has to be associated with a pencil. Survival with a swan. Wiring with McDonald's. Let me show you how I would do this, or how I did it when I was memorizing it. So exercise, I got to think of something visually that reminds me of exercise. First thing that pops into my mind is like going to the gym. So I want you to imagine you go to the gym. There's a brand new gym that opens up in your neighborhood, and you see a bunch of people working out with pencils, something like this, okay? There's somebody like on the bench press with a pencil, someone else doing like the shoulder press with a pencil, maybe someone else is doing curls with a pencil, and maybe you're just confused, like, why did I sign up for this weird gym? That's how we remember number 1. Notice how it's a little bit of a weird image, and I'm doing that on purpose because I know the way that our mind works, I'm more likely to remember something if it's weird. So people working out with pencils at a gym will be enough to help me remember exercise if I'm quizzed on it later on. Because basically this, the pencil, will be my clue. All these are going to be clues. 2, 3, 4, 5. Guess what? They're no longer numbers. They're visuals. And we remember visual things better than abstract things. Numbers are abstract. Pencil, I could see in my mind what that would look like. Same thing with a swan. So you got to visualize and picture it. Number 2, I got to associate a swan with survival. So I would picture a swan struggling for survival and that it's drowning. Let's picture it drowning, okay? The swan doesn't know how to swim. Again, doesn't make sense because swans should know how to swim, but not this one. This one's drowning. It's struggling for survival. Maybe you feel bad for the swan and you jump into the water to try to save this poor swan. And that's how I'll remember survival. 3 is McDonald's. So wiring, I would picture going to McDonald's. I order a Big Mac and there's a piece of barbed wire in my Big Mac. So you get the idea. And we just keep doing this. So I'm not going to spend too much time here because I think I want to talk about how you go beyond 10. For attention, we need to associate that to a chair. 5, the hook has to be associated with short-term memory. Long-term memory has to be associated with a cherry. So maybe you picture a cherry with a really long stem. Sleep, we got to associate to this lightning bolt. Stress with the racetrack. Sensory integration with a balloon. By the way, this one might, if you ever come across terms that are vague, you got to visualize them. So when I see sensory integration, I know because I read the book, the chapter is about using your 5 senses, right? Your sense of smell, hearing, touch, taste, and so on, vision. So I picture the 5 senses, you know, those 5 body parts inside of a balloon. It's got to be a very big balloon, and there's a hand in there, there's a tongue, there's an eyeball, there's an ear, and a nose. Okay, so I picture those 5 body parts floating around in a balloon. Same thing with 10. Vision, I got to associate this with a plate or a bowl. I'm just going to fill a bowl full of eyeballs to help me remember vision. Now, if you got to remember more than 10 things, you see how we have 11 here and 12? Music, exploration. What do? You create a rule that is going to apply to everything between 11 through 20. So when I say create a rule, you could think of it like a theme. So the rule that I use is snow, But your rule can be anything you want. It doesn't have to be snow. It could be rain. And it doesn't have to be weather related. It can be, I don't know, books, babies, celebrities, cars, anything. So the way it works is, let's say we're going with the theme of snow. We have all these images we could use with snow. So when you get to 11, you use the pencil again. Even though we used pencil for number 1, exercise, we use pencil again, but with snow. And with the topic. The topic here is music. So we would be like, okay, music makes me think of like a composer composing music. I need to use a pencil, right? I'm going to picture, you know, that baton that the composers use to compose music. It's not a baton, it is a giant pencil, and the composer is maybe outside, and he's got his orchestra in front of him, and it's just a snowstorm. That's what I would picture. 12, same thing. We got to use a swan. We got to use snow again. Why? Because we made that our rule. Your rule can be anything. And then, well, what else do we have to include here? Well, it's got to be something like, what do I think of when I think of exploration? For me, I think of space exploration. So space, I'm going to use space, a swan, and snow. Okay, there's a swan, and it's snowing in space, a giant swan-like spaceship, okay? And swan-shaped spaceship. I would picture that, and it's snowing in outer space. So again, all weird images that don't really make sense, but that's how we could remember things, and we can remember more than 20 things if you just make another rule for 21 through 30. Make another rule for 31 through 40, and so on. Okay, I want to talk about a few other memory techniques here. This is just one of them. Try it out. Next time you got to remember things in a precise order. Oh, and by the way, how would we apply this to something like, remember we said page 19 of, see this right here? The 7 commandments from Animal Farm. If you had to remember number 1, which is, it says, whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. Number 1 is a pencil in this system, right? A pencil. So I would picture the animals all chasing humans with pencils, stabbing them, because the animals view the humans as enemies. So they're attacking the humans with pencils. So you get the idea. But there's another memory technique, and this one can also be used. The memory palace technique is a great way to organize information by using locations, and this was used by the ancient Greeks to remember things. So this technique is a few thousand years old, but very, very useful. So here's how it works. You take a location you're familiar with, like your home. It's best to start with your home because, I mean, you live there, and it's easy to memorize a walkthrough of your home. So you see what I have here? This could be a walkthrough of your home. When I say that, what you basically have to do is create and memorize a walkthrough. So that means when you come home from work, what's location number 1? Maybe it's the front door. It doesn't have to be the front door. It could be your garage, the driveway. If you live in an apartment building, it could be the lobby of the apartment building. So we pick a number 1 and then next, and we just walk through the whole home. And I've got 10 things here, but you could have more than 10. How many do you have depends on how many things do you have to memorize. So here's another approach you can take. Your morning routine, you know, when you wake up in the morning, you're in your bedroom, and then maybe you go to your closet to get ready for work or school, and now you are, I don't know, maybe in the bathroom, then the hallway leading to the kitchen. Never repeat a location. You keep going. And by the way, after you leave like your front door, next might be your car or bus or train, you know, during your commute to work. Next could be the first street that you encounter, and so on. So what you got to do is you got to associate things that you got to memorize to whatever locations you have. So I'll give you an example. Here's an example. Let's say you got to remember something technology related, and the memory palace is your home. Let's say these are the first 5 locations. Let's say these are the first 5 things you got to remember. Maybe it's a top 10 list of largest tech companies. Okay. So what do? We're going to associate Apple to a mailbox, Amazon to the front door, Facebook to the stairway. By the way, what I would do is Apple, I would associate, Apple makes me think of Steve Jobs. I'd picture the ghost of Steve Jobs coming out of my mailbox when I open it up. For Amazon, I'd picture maybe a giant box from Amazon being delivered by Jeff Bezos at my front door. Okay. And for Facebook, I'd picture Mark Zuckerberg sitting on my stairway inside my home. And I'd be outraged. I'd be like, come on, Mark, why have you violated my privacy by breaking into my home? Twitter, blue birds flying around the living room. You get the idea. But the cool thing about this technique, you can also use it to remember details. Okay, so if you got to remember 4 details about Apple, 5 things about Amazon, 2 things about Facebook, 3 things about Twitter, got to visualize each detail and put it in 3 areas of the living room. Think about what are some things you have in your living room. The couch. I would use the couch, the coffee table, and the TV if I had to remember 3 particular things. But you got to visualize them. You want to make them exaggerated, like blue birds flying around my living room. That doesn't make any sense, right? That's fine. Actually, researchers that study memory have a name for what we're trying to accomplish here. They call it elaborative encoding. So elaborative encoding is just come up with some weird image and you're more likely to remember that information. And you can use multiple memory palaces. So this is the other big benefit in using this particular technique. Okay, how about vocabulary? I commonly get this question, especially from people where English is not their first language, and they say, you know what, I read and I'm fluent in English, but it's not my first language, so sometimes I come across words that I'm not familiar with, and that slows me down because then I gotta look them up or I gotta translate them. This technique helps you remember the meaning of words. It's called the similar sound technique. So here's how it works. We'll take a word that you're probably familiar with to start, claustrophobia. You might already know what that means. It's the fear of closed spaces, right? So let's say we were trying to teach this to a little kid. I'll give you an example. My daughter, she is 7. So my daughter's 7 years old and she has no clue what this means. I don't think she knows what this means. But let's say I had to teach her today. I'm going to use the similar sound technique to help her remember. So I'll focus on a similar sound in the word, like claus, as in Santa Claus. Now, we don't have to use Santa Claus. We could have also used claws as in, a monster. A monster has claws, right? But I don't want to scare my daughter, so I'm going to use Santa Claus. Okay, so let's go with Santa Claus. I got to associate Santa Claus to the fear of closed spaces. So how do we do this? I would tell my daughter, imagine it's, Christmas Eve, the night before Christmas, and you're in bed and all of a sudden you hear yelling outside. Someone is yelling. You go outside and you look and it turns out it's Santa. He's yelling for help. He is stuck in a chimney and he is terrified of getting stuck in chimneys. So I tell my daughter Santa Claus is claustrophobic and the meaning of this word is the fear of closed spaces. So just imagine Santa Claus afraid of getting stuck in chimneys. That's a closed space, right? And I just got to remind my daughter, just to remember, this is not the fear of Santa Claus. Okay, that's probably something else. Okay, here's a word. You probably already knew that word. How about this word, balloonphobia? A lot of people don't know what this means, but balloonphobia is the fear of needles. Okay, fear of needles. How are we going to remember this? Well, let's take balloon. What sound can you associate to a visual? When I saw balloon, to me it kind of sounds like balloon, balloon, but you could use other images. Bologna, like the lunch meat. I'm not a fan. I do not like bologna. Be alone, like being alone. That's another image. I'm going to use balloon because that was the first thing that popped into my mind. So I'd be like, okay, a balloon, and I got to associate the balloon. It's not the fear of balloons. We're just going to use balloon to remember fear of needles. I picture a giant red balloon afraid of needles, and maybe the needles are coming towards it in a slow fashion and it's yelling for help. And we dramatize the whole situation so we can remember it better. Here's a word. This is the fear of people, by the way, anthrophobia. Okay, you could have got that from anthro. If you know your prefixes, anthro, kind of like anthropology, the study of people. But here's the thing. Most people are not familiar with like Greek and Latin prefixes and the origin of words. That includes me. So we don't have to go with anthro, we could go with ant, right? Now, we got to associate the ant or ants to fear of people. That's easy. I'd imagine a bunch of ants afraid of people stepping on them. Like a village full of ants, just picture from their perspective, a bunch of giant footsteps like crashing down, and it's like earthquake-like conditions because it's human footsteps and they're all running for cover. We'd picture this weird scenario to remember. Oh, when I see the word ant, I'll remember the image of, oh yeah, the ants were afraid of people. Anthrophobia. Ah, yes, then it sinks in. And you know what? We could do this with other languages. Here's the Spanish word for boat. It's pronounced barco. It might not be perfect pronunciation, but barco means boat. Okay, now when I saw this word the first time I looked at it, I saw the sound bark. Bark reminds me of like a dog barking. We could also use the image of a bar. You see bar? But I went with bark like a dog, and I had to associate to a boat, so I pictured a dog stranded at sea at a boat. Or actually, we could go with a more silly image and make it like, okay, it's a tiny little dog, a cute little dog, and it's in a paper boat. Maybe you feel bad for this poor dog at sea, and maybe you want to save it. Anyway, you get the idea. Now look, here's another word in German. The word for movie theater or cinema is Kino. Kino, I saw this and I'm like, I could associate that to another sound like rhino, kino, rhino. It's not the same sound. It's a similar sound. So kino, I would picture I'm in a movie theater, I'm enjoying a film, and halfway through the movie, a bunch of rhinos bust through the screen and they start chasing people everywhere. I'm Polish, so here is the Polish word for house or home. It's pronounced dom, and dom just means house. So I don't know about you, but dome, it's not pronounced dome, but it sounds like the English word dome. You know, like a giant dome or a snow globe, like a snow globe has a dome. Imagine your house is surrounded by a dome, a giant snow globe type dome. Maybe not a snow globe. I'm not a big fan of snow. I moved from Chicago to Miami for a reason. I got sick and tired of the cold weather, so that's part of the reason I moved. Anyway, so this is how we can remember words. Now we got 3 strategies now. When we get to this step in the reading process, you know, we inspect first, get familiar with it, read next, and then we ask questions like, what do I got to memorize? Okay, I got to store the information. How? Should I store it with the numeric peg system? Should I use numbers? Should I use the memory palace, locations? Or should I use the similar sound technique, sound? Any one of these can work for, depending on your purpose. Do I have to remember vocabulary? Do I have to remember things in order? Or do I have to remember a lot of things in order and a lot of details as well? So keep that in mind. Also, the memory palace, you got to remember that you can use multiple memory palaces. There's your home, there's your workplace, there's a school where you work, grandma's place, there's your friend's place. So there's a lot of possibilities there. Okay, real quick, I want to talk about notes. We do have a great note-taking course. If you go to our website, irisreading.com, you can find that. Actually, I'll put the link in the chat, but let's talk a little bit about notes. And the note-taking course that we have on the website, it goes very, very deep into that topic. When I say that, I mean, it'll cover the most optimal ways to take notes and probably some ways that you might not be familiar with, but you can take notes during this process. So you inspect and then you take notes. When you do that, you're getting extra repetition in, because when you read something, that's 1 repetition. When you write it down, that's another repetition. Now, while you're reading, you also take notes. When you're asking questions, you might reorganize your notes and store. Where are you going to store? What programs are you going to use? Now, let's say you store your notes, you've read something. How fast do we forget the information? There's something called the forgetting curve, and it looks like this. When you first learn something, you see the retention over here, you forget things very, very quickly unless you review it. And when you review it, you ever hear the phrase bringing, like something is top of mind? This is like bringing it back top of mind. You review your notes, but you'll still forget over time. And that's okay, that's normal. But the forgetting curve does not, you don't forget as fast if you review. When we review again, look, it's not as fast. Review again, so it does, at first it's very, very steep, a very sharp decline. But the more times you review, that decline lessens over time. So when should you review your notes? You can take a mathematical approach. You use the Fibonacci sequence, and here's what we do. So I want you to notice, if you're not already familiar with this, the way the Fibonacci sequence works is every number is separated by, well, the way you get the next number is you add the previous two numbers. So you see 1 plus 1, that equals 2. 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5, 3 plus 5 is 8, 5 plus 8 is 13, and you keep going forever. But what I want you to notice about this is initially the gaps between the numbers are very small. You see the gap here? 1. You see the gap here? Just 1. The gap here is 2. Now it's 3. Now it's 5. Now the gap is 8. 13. So it's starting off very, very small, and then it gets wider and wider, and it gets exponentially wider as you continue. The reason this is important when it comes to your memory, you have to review information initially very, very quickly, and then you could space it out wider and wider and wider. So what that means is we can use a mathematical approach to figure out when we should review our notes. So you can think of this as like Fibonacci review periods. When do I review? Fibonacci numbers are at the top. This is going to be a timeline. At the bottom here, this is going to be when we review. Let's say you just finished reading a chapter, or you just finished class and you have some notes, and you're done at 12 noon, okay? When should you review? Let's say, and by the way, this is only for purposes where you have a test coming up tomorrow or after tomorrow, and you need to know something really, really well, like you want to study and understand it extremely well. 1 hour later, that's our next Fibonacci number. 1 hour later, at 1 p.m., review your notes. 2 hours later, review again. 3 hours later, review again. And we just keep doing this. 5 hours later, at 11 p.m., I'm going to review again. 8 hours later, first thing in the morning. Now, I know that this is kind of convenient because based on when the numbers started, if you change the time at the beginning, you know, these numbers could be like 3 or 4 in the morning. I'm not saying you should wake up at that time and review your notes, but generally speaking, you should follow this advice of quick reviews at first and then space them out wider and wider. And if we keep going here, look, I review my notes at 7, again, 13 hours later at 8 p.m. Again, only if I need to know it really well. So what's happening here is we are we are interrupting the forgetting curve. So remember I said when you first learn something, you forget it very quick. Well, we got to review. And now we're temporarily bringing it to 100%, but we'll still forget. That's okay. 2 hours later, I review it again. Boom. I'm still going to forget. That's okay, but not as fast. 3 hours later at 6 p.m., I review again. Eventually, you don't have to keep reviewing because you know what's going to happen. After a certain amount of repetitions, you know it. It becomes long-term memory. You just want to use this as a strategy or a mathematical approach to remembering and reviewing your information. Now, this is hourly, right? You don't have to do it hourly. You could do it by the day. It all depends on your information. So I would do hourly if I have a test coming up tomorrow or after tomorrow. I would do daily if this is just, I'm in school and I don't have a test coming up, but I had to read this information and I should review it because I'll eventually have a test or I'll eventually have a final exam. So maybe I do a daily approach where I say, okay, I read this chapter 5, I got my notes. 1 day later, I'll review the notes. 2 days later, 3 days later, 5 days later, or we could even do this weekly or monthly. I use monthly scales when I read because I'm no longer in school, but when I read, I still want to remember what I've read. It's just that I'm not going to be tested on this material. So what I do is I'll create my notes, and I like to use mind maps. Mind mapping, if you haven't taken our mind mapping course, check that out. It's a great course, and you can find that on the website. But I have a mind map for every single book that I've read, and what I'll do is a month later, I'll review that mind map. 2 months later, 3 months later, 5 months later, and I keep going until I decide Okay, I know this really well. I don't have to keep repeating. They call this spaced repetition. And it's just a way of spacing out your repetitions over time. We're more likely to remember something long-term if you do it this way. Now, as far as improving your focus, that is very important when it comes to memory. If we don't have attention, you're not going to remember anything. If you're interested in this book, this is a really great book. It's 100 pages. I can distribute the free version of this book via PDF. So the author has given us permission to send this out. Leo Babauta, he runs a popular blog, Zen Habits. This is an awesome book. It's a very quick read. And if you're interested in learning, you see the topic is Focus, a Simplicity Manifesto in the Age of Distraction. Shoot me an email. It's just Paul@Iris Reading. And if you email me after the webinar is over here, I will make sure that I email you back with a copy of this, the PDF of this book. So that's if you're interested in improving your focus. I think that's something all of us can benefit from. Now, if you're interested in advanced courses like that go deeper than just like today, go to this link and you can see courses related to speed reading, improving your comprehension. There's a course that goes even deeper into maximizing memory. So if you like this topic, check out that course. Also, effective note-taking, personal productivity. And for those of you joining us on this live stream, we set up a code, and it's just my name, Paul, and that'll give you an extra 30% off any discounts that there might already be on the website. So make sure you use that if you happen to be interested. Again, if you want me to send you that PDF, shoot me an email, and that'll just be a reminder to me that I always check my inbox a few times a day, and I'll make sure that I send that over to you. Now, I understand not everyone is in a financial position to pay for a course, and that's fine. You can do us a huge favor and support us through YouTube. If you go to the link, actually, sorry, it's right here. You go Paul Nowak. That is the link where we're going to be posting weekly updates on topics related to literacy, reading more efficiently, taking notes, getting more productive, memory-related topics. So if any of that is of interest to you, down below, if you're watching this on YouTube right now, because we're streaming on like 5 different platforms right now, subscribe to the channel. You can hit that little icon that looks like a little alarm, that little ding. It'll give you an update every time we upload a new video or when we have a new live stream coming up. So I've got my contact information. Also, you're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just message me on there and let me know that you attended the session. And I'm happy to connect you with any people that might be in my network that might be beneficial to your career. So feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. Also, if you want to follow on Instagram, there it is right there, Paul G. Nowak. But thank you all so much for attending. I hope you found today's session helpful. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out or put the questions in the comments below and we'll try to put together a video based on those questions. But thank you all so much for attending. Have a great rest of the day. Take care.